everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible panel that we've got and this discussion we've got right in the middle of London Climate Action Week. And we really do have an incredible panel that are really the doers and the change makers that are leading the way in London right now. And I have the great pleasure of speaking to them today. And Worldwide Generation is doing this series called The Do Show, and it really is to highlight people that are doing the do and taking action. And so really, really great to have Sarah, Rob, and Paul on the call today, and we're going to showcase them. So if we can get them on screen, that'd be awesome. Hey, hi Paul. Hey Rob. Hi. Hi Sarah.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Excellent. So I'd love to just start by getting you to just quickly introduce yourselves and your organization, and then we'll take the discussion further.
Okay. Shall I go first?
Yes, please, Paul.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Paul Wood, and I'm an author, and I write about trees and the environment in London specifically. And my books are London is a Forest, and also recently published London Tree Walks.
Wow. And we're going to hear a lot about your sort of story and what got you to be doing this as part of, like, you know, the books. I mean, it's absolutely, I was reading your bios, absolutely fascinating work. Sarah, why don't we go to you and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Sarah Korich, and I am the founder and CEO of Infinite Closet. We are a newly launching clothing rental platform here in London.
Excellent. And Rob?
Yeah, so I'm Rob. I'm one of the founders of Chipsboard Limited. So Chipsboard is a material innovation company that's turning industrial food waste into sustainable bioplastics for use in all sorts of industries, but mainly sort of fashion and just sort of design sectors.
So I want to go to Sarah actually, and you know, for me, like, we've been Worldwide Generation, we've been on this kind of crazy story and journey, and what even got us to land our business and our platform in London. So I'm curious that you've got an American accent. What brought you to London, and what made you, you know, set up a business in London, especially a sustainable one?
Yeah. So I moved over originally to do my MBA. I went to Kingston, and it was kind of just a change of pace for me. I had lived across the US in different places and knew I wanted to move over to Europe. And so London seemed like a good opportunity to sort of do that. And then once I got here, I basically just fell in love with the city. It reminds me a lot of New York, but just a little more relaxed, which I really appreciated. And the opportunity to start Infinite Closet really just stemmed from business school. We were tasked with coming up with an idea for our innovation enterprise course. And I realized that renting had been such a staple in my wardrobe in the US, from services like Rent the Runway. And when I moved here, there wasn't really anything similar. And so I realized that it seemed like a good opportunity to sort of get people on board with the sharing economy more, especially women. We tend to be so wasteful with our clothes. You know, we wear them once or twice, we see them in pictures, and then we tend to not want to wear them again. So we utilize outfits for one-off occasions. And so the idea of being able to bring a business model that would kind of encourage people to stop thinking that way about their clothing seemed like a really good opportunity to bring here.
Wow. And you know, the fashion industry is, you alluded to it before, but really it is unfortunately such a consumer-driven industry that has a lot of waste attached to it, and the idea of where that waste ends up, and even, you know, there's an economic issue around some retailers, if they're on the high end of fashion, that they can't really discount it and reuse it, and all of that, you know, and that's where it's just ended up being probably one of the industries that if we can turn it around, will actually have the greatest impact on society and the planet. So we're going to come back to you with some more questions, but maybe we'll go to Paul. And I guess same question to you. What's the story that got you to doing this work that you're doing, which is quite niche and remarkable?
Niche,
I mean,
yes.
it's so amazing when I saw what you're doing. But yeah, tell us your story.
Okay, well, I guess it all stemmed from a blog. I started writing a blog about 10 years ago. I'd been living in London for about 15 years then, and I had grown up in the countryside, and I kind of missed the countryside, but I kind of really liked living in London. But I noticed all the trees and the parks and everything in London, and places like Highgate Woods and stuff like that really kind of excited me, that these all existed in London. The trees in London particularly, I think, are really fascinating, and they're really apparent. They really define the city in many ways. So I was writing about them, and I was kind of looking at all the different species that were here and the stories which are associated with them in terms of where they come from, the human stories around migration and trade and all these things which impact the natural world and have made the city that it is in terms of the environmental sort of footprint it has, perhaps, and also in terms of the diversity that can be found in a city. Weirdly, cities are more botanically diverse than the countryside.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and that's because of humans' intervention, I suppose.
And so how'd you make the transition from the blog?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
to being an incredible author and all the stuff,
yeah,
what you've realized and what you've translated now to understanding the natural world and translating that to sustainability.
Yeah. I guess I always had an interest in nature and trees since I was a kid, and I was writing about it on this blog. I was approached by a publisher who said, wouldn't it be great to write a book about the street trees in London, and very specifically, what is the story of street trees? What are they all? Lots of people seem to want to know what they were. And this was kind of news to me, really, because I thought it was a sort of lone sort of personal interest. So I wrote a book which was published in 2017 called London Street Trees. And it was a great surprise to me. It kind of sold out really quickly. People were really interested. I had lots of people get in contact with me kind of saying, this is really something which I've been looking for. And so it was a fantastic thing for me to discover that there were lots of other people that had similar interests. And through that, I sort of had all sorts of things have opened up. And I'm here this evening, for instance, which I think is sort of one of those. And I wrote another book called London is a Forest, which was published in 2019. And that was about journeys around the city, exploring the green spaces and all the different environments and so on that can be found in the city. And since then, I suppose it's all sort of morphed into being a spokesperson for the environment and trees, as well as writing about them. So I kind of see it as a sort of, I wouldn't regard myself as solely as an author. I kind of feel like I have a bit of a mission to talk about these things and to show people and to make it accessible. So I do lots of talks and tours and stuff like that as well. Not so many tours at the moment, though. Wow.
Isn't that amazing? Like you could do something so niche like that and it's turned into a movement, right? It's just beautiful. And here you are on this panel. But Rob, why don't we go to you? And I'd love to hear your story be as personal as possible. Tell us from the womb.
It's awesome hearing the other kind of story. I think, Paul, you remind me of Dr. Seuss's The Lorax speaking. So it's fantastic. So yeah, Chipsword started in 2017 at the university project between myself and my co-founder Rowan. We were designers who were making copious amounts of things, as you do in design school. You're making projects and prototypes and all sorts of wonderful things which never really come into fruition because they're just there as things to get a grade or things to just finish a project. But one thing that stuck with us throughout the 3 years studying was the copious amounts of material that we'd be using. So foams and boards and plastics, all just for very short periods of life. So 2 weeks of a project, and then there was nowhere we could store them at the university. There's nowhere we could store them in the uni house. So literally, they would go into a big skip behind the art school, which is really horrendous that we were sort of attributing to that. So that just sort of led into a project around exploration around materials, seeing if we could discover materials that others hadn't. At the time, Rowan was working as a chef at university, so he had access to lots of peel from all the potatoes they turned into fries. We sort of took this as our raw stock, and we just really sort of went mad science-esque with it in our university kitchen. You can imagine the smell kind of annoyed the other 2 people we were living with, and
That's
sort
hilarious.
of very potato-y for a whole year. But really sort of through the smoke, as it were, we'd come up with a material that isn't what we do today, but it sort of just showed the potential of using a food waste as a viable material. And then really it's been a bit of a roller coaster over the last 3 years. So in London, we were successful in lots of entrepreneurship awards. So we were Santander Entrepreneur of the Year. We won awards through the Royal Academy of Engineering, Mayor of London, through Kingston University itself. So and this really skyrocketed us, allowed us to grow a team. And now we're up in Leeds. We've moved 2 months ago. So it's been a bit of a hectic year for us. And we're producing this bioplastic, which is really being sought after by so many people, in so many different industries, but specifically fashion, looking at sort of buttons, fastenings, accessories. As you guys mentioned, as Sarah mentioned, fast fashion, if you can find solutions to that is the most polluting industry we have. So actually aiding to solutions within fashion is very important for us. And also our material being biodegradable and recyclable, but it's also not to be used in single-use plastic, fits in really well because you could use it in an item which is meant to last 5 to 10 years, but then when it becomes unfashionable or other parts of the garment break, it's really easy to recycle or basically make sure that we're not putting plastic into the environment. So that's the sort of a long story, not quite short, but short enough.
I love it. No, it's amazing. I love the stories, right? So when when COVID happened and we heard about it, we were in a building in Finsbury Square in the city of London. We were sitting in a room called the Wuhan room. I kid you not, right? And basically it was, we heard about it and we were like, oh my goodness, wow. And then on the 13th of March, I still remember this day, it was a Friday, the 13th. I said to my team, hey, let's simulate a lockdown and let's go and work from home for a bit and see if we can get, continued working processes. And then London got locked down, and we were like, well, we're an SME. We would just finished kind of the pilot of our platform, and we were thinking, oh my God, sustainability is going to go right to the bottom of the barrel, right? And everyone's priority lists are going to change. And so we were thinking, are we even going to make it through this thing? And even at the start, like all of the investors were like losing their money, and it was just a full-on thing that happened. But what we saw was just this change, this awakening, this consciousness rose, right? We got phone calls from all over the world saying, hey, we're leaving our job, or we're finding purpose, or we're getting reflection, and actually can we come and work together? And we saw this rise of the SME spirit, this movement that just came out of nowhere. And I don't know, I'm going to talk to you all about, like, did you kind of see this over the last sort of 18 months where something just turned, right? We partner with a platform, an organization called FinCap. They look after SME mid-cap companies. We saw this surge of growing companies, but also companies that were aligned to purpose and were actually coming out of even stronger and saying, because we're aligned to purpose, actually they were buoyant through the process, through the whole pandemic. So I guess my first question is, maybe going back to Rob, number one, what was your kind of experience over the last sort of 18 months? And I guess, what are the opportunities you saw that London presented itself? I know you've moved to Leeds now, but I guess what was your experience, and did you see this whole sea change happen as well in your industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So so first of all, obviously when the pandemic hit, it was, my story is going to be no different from a lot of other people in terms of the initial reaction. Obviously, it was sort of a massive shock. The biggest of all, which I'll be very transparent, is we had an investment round that was due to close in March of that year.
Yeah.
That got severely delayed because a lot of investors all of a sudden realised that they had to be a lot more sensible with
right. Of course.
And actually, that it was considerably later we were able to close that round. So obviously that caused sort of some worries around sort of, do we have enough money, burn rates, all of these things that.
Oh my gosh, same, yeah.
So that was a really interesting experience. Luckily, I am in I'm a co-founder, so there's someone else that I can bounce these things off and just address. And I think communication over lockdown has been absolutely key for us, making sure that we are able to just voice any frustrations, opinions, because I think we missed out massively on the water cooler chats, they call them. So leaning over a desk and saying,
totally,
what a crap week. That's so me and my co-founder Rowan, we made sure that we had sort of bi-weekly meetings where it wasn't about, okay, this is the structure of this meeting, this is what we need to address. It's just how are we feeling week on week, and what's happening. We made sure we kept communication open, and we made sure that was echoed throughout the whole of the team as well. In terms of London and COVID, I think it's been extremely interesting in the sense of, I think it's opened London up to the rest of the world, not just the rest of the country, but the rest of the world. It's very apparent when you're in the inside, as it were. So once you're sort of inside these sort of sustainability entrepreneurship events, you get invited to more and more and more. And it snowballs. You get opportunities that necessarily people don't, because you obviously find a way in and you stay within the sort of the bubble. I think COVID, by opening these kind of events on Zoom, online, accessibility has been so much broader than people attend physical events in London. So I think really Zoom events have been really interesting, because people in Edinburgh, in Spain, in America, all across the world can now actually access this sort of information pool, or just this networking pool that we were seeing really just in London. So I think actually COVID has almost brought London to the rest of the world digitally, especially events like this. And it's allowed, and it's also laser focused really. It's almost been a great sieve, because also when we have still had these competitions running, sort of sustainable entrepreneurs or tech entrepreneurs or like health, and actually, because we haven't got the opportunity to mingle and network, it's had to be very specific in terms of, we've got an hour on Zoom, we need to figure out this and this. So it's broadened the net of who can enter these things or be involved in the conversation, but at the same time it's allowed problems to be focused extremely quickly and very efficiently, because it's no longer a meeting in person that can run on for 3 hours. It's a scheduled Zoom meeting that is probably booked 12 till 12:30, and everything you said needs to be said in that time.
Right. And actually London reacted with, furlough, and the British Business Bank put the Future Fund together, and there was just a lot of innovation that happened very quickly to help companies and SMEs just, bounce back loans and all this sort of stuff that happened. But, I do feel that anyone that was consumer facing really, what does that mean? And Sarah, you imagine if do you actually have a store, or is it's only online, your business? Or what was your experience?
Yeah, but I think there was definitely still the effect that was felt, and I think a lot of it stemmed from, again, because things weren't in person anymore, people really cutting back on how much they realized they needed to consume, which obviously is a good thing as well. But the thing that we really saw the most, especially because for us, we hadn't actually launched yet during COVID. And that's been a big reason as to why, because so much of what we do is really focused on, events and special occasions, kind of supplying people with clothes that they're only going to wear once.
Yeah.
And so with COVID, being in place, none of that was happening. But it also opened a door for us to have that conversation with more customers and be able to introduce them to this concept, because I think there was a realization of like, if this is sort of how the world is, or like as I'm sort of seeing things now in a clearer perspective, I don't need as much stuff as I thought I did. I can cut back on how many clothes I buy. I don't need to shop as much. I can sort of like, rewear stuff I already have. And so I think it sort of has changed people's mentalities around that. But I think there's also a side effect to that as well, where people are very ready to go out and kind of live again. And so, we're kind of hoping that with that piece of it, at least for us from a business perspective, is the idea stems into, looking into sources like us and sources like, secondhand buying and ways to sort of build out their clothing and be able to wear these new fun things for all of their so-called like, year plus that they missed out on in life, but in a more sustainable way. And I think that's been something that we've seen in the interviews and research that we've conducted with especially the London market, of people really being more conscientious of how they're spending their money and on what kind of quality stuff.
I bet you're going to get a surge in people buying trousers and shoes, because we've all been living in sweatpants for like 18 months, right?
Exactly.
So I'm interested in the stats when we all come back to, I've actually got to go out now. Paul, tell us your experience and what was the 2020 to 2021.
Sure. Well, I think to mirror what Sarah and Robert have been saying, it's that kind of digital globalization has entrenched communication across the globe has become easier, and networks have been formed across the globe much more readily, and that has occurred in all walks of life, I think, including the types of things which I do. So whereas before my interests might have been very specific in London, I think that whilst that specificity is still particular and appropriate, it means that ideas can be shared across the world very easily. And I've had all sorts of amazing conversations with people all around the world about very particular things to do with cities, environmentalism, rethinking the future, and so on. And then I think the second thing, again, is our reconnection with nature, which has been a massive theme throughout lockdown. And that's something which I think is a hugely positive thing that we will hopefully not forget as soon as we're able to, have much more active lives again. And I think that that's an incredibly important aspect of feeding into a much broader notion of sustainability and how we move forward in the future.
Beautiful. So if we go to the next phase of this, where at a macro level, I've been kind of analyzing this now, is that, you've got planet sick, right? We've got 1.5 degrees kind of left in, before irreversible decline potentially. People are sick literally through COVID, right? And we've got, and that's sort of growing with all these variants and everything. And my whole 17 years of this whole trying to understand why we got to this point as a human race is been about really seeing that our social, economic, environmental systems are actually broken, right? So my view is it's not about building back better, it's about building back new. We need a new system. And so if we take that down further, my feeling is that we're now in London Climate Action Week, and a lot of people are talking about climate, and we've got to fix climate, and we've got to, which I agree with, but climate change is a symptom, it's not a cause. And so our belief and what we're advocating for is that, number one, to see holistically, right, that we need to look at the social, economic, and environmental together as the trinity of sort of sustainable development. The belief is that you start with the S, you start with society, you start with us, you start with belief system, consumption choices. And that comes from all of the data that we get, right? As a child, as we grow up, as we consume, as we hear, as we listen, that's how our brain creates belief systems. And we really believe that if we can help society to heal and to actually change our mindsets with new belief systems, that actually sustainability is value and value creation and regeneration, as opposed to being something you do on the side, then the next step is the economic system. At the moment, we've got an economic system that's not compatible with human thinking. We actually penalize the bad behavior that makes people hide more, disclose less, fear more. Actually, if we had an economic system that rewarded the good behavior, we would have a very different trajectory to solving this. And then the E, which is the environment, is that we believe that if you can heal yourself, you heal the planet, right? Because the E will take care of itself. It can regenerate. The body can regenerate. Nature can regenerate. We saw that in COVID when we stopped flying and we stopped, right? The trees started coming back, the rivers started coming back, the birds started chirping again. We started to see the smog lift. So from that kind of landscape, I'd love to go back to Rob again and sort of say, I guess, do you believe, number one, do you kind of believe in that philosophy that, it starts with us, starts with people? You're obviously on the environmental side, trying to solve that problem, but really it came from a decision you had, right? You and your co-founder saying, actually, we're going to have to change this story and this narrative, and we're going to have to find a way to regenerate and recycle and reuse. And I guess, what is your philosophy about this? And are we kind of trying to solve the symptom rather than the cause? And what's your view?
Yeah, my view is it's such a hard sort of that's a really hard question to answer, really. A metaphor that I often use is that, so I truly believe that we as a civilization, as human beings, have all the answers, but it's about communication. We're trying to solve a puzzle that there's certain pieces that are missing, some of the wrong shape, some of a completely different puzzle.
Yes.
There is a way that we could bring these together to create a full picture, which is hitting the goals with the sort of the climate agreements and various things that have been set out.
Yes.
It's very skeptical. I don't necessarily believe in the power of people, the power of consumers necessarily, to the fullest extent that others do. Sort of this sort of thing that we're told, which is if we all stop shopping at this shop, they're going to have to change, because it'll be 20% of the customers stop shopping there, the other 80% will happily shop there, and if anything, spend more, because clearly they're not swaying by a movement. So it's very hard to sort of fix the problem, as you say, at the end and with the people, because actually there's 20% of people will care about the problem, 80% of people won't. And that's where you need to go to completely the other side, which you need the large corporations, these large companies, governments, to actually force change, have a little bit of radical sustainability, and force change. And
do you think that's government's job, or do you think that's the corporations?
It's everyone. We all need to be, as I said, we all need to be sort of solving the same puzzle, right? But I think there's definitely some miscommunication. I think, and then like people inherently, we're followers, right? We like to be told what's the fashion. We like to be told what's trendy. Actually, if all of these large companies actually come together and say, you know what, the next cool thing is being sustainable. We're also victims of education in the sense that we've been told things for years which are fundamentally not necessarily true, or even the best way forward. So we're all told reduce, reuse, recycle. Oh, I'm sustainable because I recycle. What we're not saying is recycling is the very, very end thing we should be doing. It's when you're in a supermarket, actually reducing the decision to buy the plastic in the first place.
Correct.
That is where we can make small changes on an individual level. So it's reduce first. It's not recycle is the extreme, recycle is the end. So I think there's decisions we can all make, but then obviously talking about plastic packaging, for example, supermarkets could decide could completely, I mean, maybe lose out on some profits, maybe lose out on other things, but they could decide to completely cut plastics from their store, thus meaning the consumer hasn't got a way to buy a product in plastic. I know that's a very simple, straight arrow approach, and there's lots of complications, which means that it does need to be phased out rather than just kicked out immediately. But it needs to come from both ends of the rope, really. I don't think it's a case of, okay, whose problem is this to solve? It's everyone's problem. We all need to do our bit to make sure that the problem is being addressed. And it can't be moved on to the next person. We all need to do our bits. We need to recycle. We need to reduce. We need to make conscious decisions about what we purchase and how we behave in an environmentally friendly way. But also, like I said, there needs to be pressure on governments, companies, and huge corporates. The size of some of these corporates, the size of countries, have the power to really drive change. So I think it's not an easy answer a sort of question to answer, because it relies on some companies changing massive areas of their business, obviously risking financial loss and all various things that these companies are very risk averse and wouldn't necessarily do. So yeah, I don't have the answers, but I know it's a problem that we all need to address.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that we're trying to tackle through this platform, is that actually what we want to give is the full holistic lens, the whole system, right, from the source to the target, right, and give this. So, for example, we're all told veganism's good, so we all kind of go down that route, and then we actually find out the supply chain is not as still got serious problems in that supply chain. Then we go and say, okay, yeah, plastics not great, and then we realize actually there is actually really good uses for plastic. It's just that we have to have the right, we need to place it in the right areas. And if you take just the plastic bag, for example, and you put that in India, that is someone's bag. It's they carry their food in it, they store their food, that's their school bag. It's everything to that person. And so everything needs a systemic lens to it to understand where's the net contribution, right? If you take the supply chain, like even electric vehicles, right, the battery, the lithium battery, and you then go and also the cobalt, right, and then you go to the actual, so electric vehicles, yes, better than diesel, but actually if you take all the supply chain of how you make that car, is that the net contribution actually better for a society and the planet, right? And how, so what we're trying to do is how much we can disseminate that data, that holistic lens, to the everyday person, so ultimately we can be informed to make these decisions. Because how do you know? Like, how do you know which way to go, right? And every week there's some new direction we need to go into.
Fundamentally, the first step is going back 50 years, because a lot of these problems we're having with single-use packaging didn't exist. You didn't get fruit in blistered back. Reusable water bottles, you didn't go buy a plastic bottle. If you wanted when you're out, you bought flasks, again with you had string bags, or you had reusable bags, you had baskets going to the shops. The problems that they're not okay, we've been doing it for hundreds of years. These are problems we've developed ourselves over the last few years. To sound like my grandparents, like, oh, we didn't have these problems when. So the first step is just going back to a system that no one had a problem with, like just a few decades ago. So clearly we can go back to that stage, and then it's moving even further to say, okay, how can we push this to actually try and reverse some of the damage? So let's go back and just sort of almost seal the wound, as it were, and go back to a system that humanity was happy with. We were happy bringing bags, but then convenience meant that obviously all of a sudden we weren't happy bringing bags to shops.
Right.
So,
right.
In Tupperware.
And now we need to deliver to our house. So actually, right, that's where the real packaging comes in. So Sarah, I'll go to you. And I know I've given a very, very big macro lens, but I think, going back to the industry that you're in, does it start with people? Does it start with the consciousness, the awakening, the new belief systems, do you think, to solve this problem?
I think that's a big part of it. And I think that there's a way to I want to say that there's an easy way to just make everyone care and make it so that, people put it in the front of their minds that the way that they shop has so many different, effects from what materials are made out of your clothes to, who makes it. And that's why, groups like Fashion Revolution and these organizations who are really trying to make that more apparent are really important. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, it's kind of like what we said, a lot of people choose convenience over, function. And so, the way that we've been trying to sort of approach it in our business model, especially with, creating this sort of circular economy, is making people understand and introducing them to brands that are trying to do better. And there's so much greenwashing in the fashion industry. You've got, companies like, H&M and they all, introduce this eco-conscious line. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because they're still producing massive amounts of products. They're still, using really cheap labor and, and underpaying their employees. And so, but people will still buy those products simply because it's on the high street, it's accessible, and it's cheap. And so a lot of it stems from really the educational part of it, and essentially trying to do it in a way that doesn't feel like you're necessarily teaching people or trying to preach, but really trying to sort of open their eyes into what is happening in the planet and what is happening to, these people that are working in these kind of terrible conditions and things. And so, one thing that we've been trying to sort of do, at least for us as an organization, is we partner with brands who focus on ethical business practices and sustainability. And we talk to this about this with our customers. We don't work with fast fashion brands. We don't work with anyone who doesn't score a particular way on the Good on You app and things like that. So we look for ways to really understand the environmental impact of our brand partners so that we can inform our consumers and still show them that fashion can still be sustainable and trendy, and there are ways to consume less but still kind of feel fulfilled and be able to sort of be who you are and express yourself in certain ways, but that don't need to necessarily depend on you buying a shirt from Primark for £2. And there's a reason why it's so cheap, and there's a reason why we need to understand the effects of that. And there's also socioeconomic things that come into that. There's obviously people's pay and their ability to afford certain products, and a lot of that needs to be kept in mind for sure. Sustainability is still a luxury, unfortunately, and that's something that people need to really keep in mind. But there are definitely ways that we can make approaches and make changes into our style that can be full about that. And it just starts with small steps to figure out how we can do that. And so especially in fashion, we've got such a long way to go, and unfortunately it is a mindset that we struggle with every day. I see on fashion forums on a regular basis another person asking, oh, is anyone shop from Shein? How is it? There's 10 different shirts that I need from there, and it's only going to cost me £20. This is amazing. And you can only do so much to keep trying to put that perspective into people to understand that you don't need those things. You don't have to shop that way. And, it's better to, look into sort of new ways of shopping and new ways of consuming that, that focus on just needing less and supporting businesses who do think about the future and how the environment is being affected and people as well.
Yeah. Beautiful. Paul, tell us about tell us what the tree could tell, what can we learn from the tree with this, right?
Well, maybe the lesson from the tree is to think about time in a different way, and to think about how trees live much longer than we do, and they're static, and they put up with all sorts of different things which are happening to them, and they've gone through many different decades and even centuries of things. And when you think about human history and the life of a tree, you can think of all sorts of amazing things. So just walking around the streets of London, look at a London plane tree, for instance, which are the big trees which are all over the centre of town, most of which will be 150 to 170 years old, say. But they were planted by Victorians for a specific purpose, which was to beautify the city. But they've continued to do that. They've continued to provide that. They've lived through terrible industrial pollution. They've lived through 2 world wars. They've lived through, all the current pollution that we're doing. They're living through climate change as well. And that's really apparent for trees. And I think one of the things that we should be aware of with trees and plants and all sorts of sort of nature really is the effects of how we move things around. So a good example is maybe Dutch elm trees. So elm trees used to be everywhere. Dutch elm disease came in the 1970s, wiped them out. And that was a result of humans kind of moving things around the world. And that was quite an early example of something like that happening. There is an even earlier one, which is the American chestnut throughout the east coast of the US, which was wiped out in the 19th century. But those sorts of pests and diseases, which are moving around the world much more rapidly now, are going to have this potential to wipe out whole tree species very, very rapidly, and that's going to be very apparent in towns and cities. So I think that it's where tree time is colliding with human time, and I'm not quite sure what the parable is there, but it's an interesting thought. And I think to sort of get back to some of the ideas that were being discussed, I completely agree with this idea that we need to kind of look backwards at how we used things differently in the past. And as Rob mentioned about, using paper bags and using one bag and so on. And these sorts of things seem to me to do with regulation. Ultimately, we can try and chip away around the edges, but while H&M are still able to sell, and Primark are still able to sell fast fashion at £2, there really needs to be something much more fundamental. And I don't think business is up to it. It has to be government. When you look at the response to COVID, that was businesses that led, there was governments that led that. Ultimately, the governments are the ones that can really make the difference to the environment in which businesses work within. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry to pick on, H&M and Primark, because I think every sector has...
Well, they're terrible.
But every sector is coming into the light. Transparency is here now, every sector. And I mean it, like, whether it's... and the other thing, I'm kind of on the other side, because I think waiting for government to legislate can take years, right? It actually sometimes can take 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. We've got 8.5 years. We've got 2.5 years probably to really turn the dial on doing this. Rob, I do think the power of the people, the power of the consumer, the power of the people that vote, the power of the people that consume has more power right now, in particularly post-COVID, than we've ever had. This power to transform, to move into a more democratized and decentralized kind of community and global community. And that power en masse can change whole cities, whole nations faster than a government legislation, I think. Sorry.
If I can, I think I agree. But what I'm saying is we're all singing in this chat, we're all singing the same tune, right? But actually there's 30% of the population that demand change. But the other 70%, and I'm going to come in with a cape and a mask and defend Primark and H&M, because we know that historically their practices have been bad. We talk about labour, we talk about resourcing. I know firsthand that a lot of these fashion companies are reaching out to us. We're having conversations with, because they are desperately trying to basically improve the way they are doing things. But the metaphor that I've just imagine, so if it's not right, then forgive me, but it's essentially if there was a 1-ton massive steel ball rolling towards someone, and obviously as a crowd we have the ability to slow down, ability to stop it, but to change direction completely is going to take so much effort. So we can do our part, we can all put a hand on it, and we can all try and slow it down and try and stop it. But what you're going to have to do first, you're going to have to actually slow that ball down fully before it can begin to go the other way. So these giants, these H&Ms, the Primarks, they're almost providing a service, because I agree that fashion should never be that cheap, and the conversation around economic wealth in various areas around the UK and actually charging for sustainability is a completely different topic. So actually what these companies do is they supply a service. They supply decent enough clothing for people that sort of have needed to shop there historically, and they've done it very well for decades. But these companies are aware of the change, but actually, like I said, stopping that speeding train, stopping that rolling ball and flipping it direction is going to take a huge amount of work. So I think that's where the power of people can help, and we can help, and we can drive and say, no, that if you want to go the other direction, we support that. But equally, they've almost been sideswiped almost. They've been happily producing clothing which people have never had a problem with and have been happy with for years, and all of a sudden the last decade sustainability has made them the villains. But and I just to say that I know firsthand, like I said, these companies are working so hard, but the amount of change needed is going to take time.
Or we're going to see a revolution with the power of the SME, shopping local, right? And if that happens, that is going to change massively, right? The power of, because actually the SMEs are most of the global economy. And if we start shopping local, we start supporting SMEs, they actually will, and they are wanting to be responsible and be more transparent and measure their impact, then you are going to see a massive change happen. The only problem is a lot of the major corporations then offer to buy them. And so that's why, I'm always encouraging entrepreneurs to stay on mission and stay the course, right? Don't, like, if that's your purpose, stay there, because that also has a lot of power to influence. So go just to kind of the last kind of question. So you've all created these really interesting, fascinating businesses in London, and I guess you've known the challenges of setting up a business, but also your purpose-driven businesses. How have you tested that what you're doing is making that impact? How are you measuring that for yourselves? And I guess what is some of that you can translate to other founders across the different nations, now that we realize actually we're one kind of much more connected than we ever were? what's some of that learning that you've given, and how have you measured that, you've started with a purpose and actually that purpose has impact? Maybe Sarah, we can start with you.
I mean, yeah, for us, it really, we use data really heavily. We have partners like GoGo and other groups who, kind of, measure a lot of the impact, especially in the fashion industry, and, how we can reduce things. I mean, obviously with our business model, it's not completely environmentally sound. Like, we are encouraging people to reduce the amount of clothing that they own. However, transportation is also still an issue because we are delivering goods across, London and potentially the rest of the UK. And so we do have to keep those things in mind and think through, okay, what are the different ways that we can still offer our services, but be, consider ourselves responsible in how we're offering these goods, and how can we make sure that we're being thoughtful about the way that we're giving the customers what they need without going back on those core values that we established for ourselves as a business. And so, to be honest, we're figuring it out. Like, we try, and we've come up with this business model. We're looking at different ways, even at the end of the life cycle. We've partnered with a local nonprofit here in the UK, where when the clothes are no longer able to be rented out, they're a refugee supporting organization. We donate the clothes to them so that these women have the opportunity to shop these clothes and have the experience to have these, more quality garments that they may not necessarily be able to afford. And so, we are trying to figure out different ways that we look at the entire impact of what it is that we do and be really thoughtful about that process. And so, we're not perfect. Might know that we'll make mistakes. We've already made mistakes. We've had learnings already as we've gone, and the best we can do is just say, we're not perfect. We're learning every day as we carry on. And I think that's the most you can do. I think a lot of times people think that if you're trying to be a sustainable business, if you're trying to be a purpose-driven business, you have to be perfect and everything has to be done right. And that's just not true. I mean, we're human. We learn as we go, and
right.
we'll figure it out day by day.
No, that's exactly right. I think I always say, leadership is vulnerability and courage, and it really is. So to go, well, I'm going to wait till my house is in order till I start telling the world that I want to be sustainable. That's not how it is really. Actually, it's taking that first step and going, yes, we're going to do this. Is our trajectory, this is our purpose. These are our targets. And then, taking it bit by bit. But I was just realizing through your platform, we're talking about education, we're talking about health and well-being, we're talking about responsible consumption, we're talking about even reducing poverty and inequality, because actually the clothes can come back to servicing women, and people in need. And I was just thinking, wow, you're actually touching on 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 SDGs just in, and so I would love to map your business actually, because I think you're actually touching on so many things. And maybe Paul, we go to you. I guess, how, when you wrote this book and you discovering the trees of London and the city, I guess, how are you thinking, well, if the world could just know this, it would help. It would help. What did you discover about the trees of London that actually could be really an eye opener for people listening to this?
I suppose the thing which I find most interesting, or the most exciting, is all the stories that can be told about through trees, and all the sort of the human stories which are there behind them, and that doesn't necessarily need to be about, you don't need to be a botanist, you don't need to be a scientist to understand what these things are doing and how they impact our lives and how important they are to many people. And I guess the other thing which is probably worth mentioning as well, which isn't something I can claim is anything to do with me, but something that I've definitely seen in London in the last few years, which is a real grassroots movements, which are happening all over the city, where people are really taking it upon themselves to start planting trees, getting more involved in their local environments and their communities through, and they are focusing around the trees, because trees are these big, static, visible, tangible, architectural things which are there in the landscape, and people recognize them and they begin to know them. And I think that as a result of that, people are beginning to create groups that are taking on the tasks which we used to we used to expect councils to do, which is things like planting trees, watering trees, and all those kind of things. And while that's quite a basic thing to do, what that also does is foster community, and fosters that notion of people getting together in very specific parts of London, getting to know people that are within those communities, and doing all those things that we know are really important, which is very localized consumption, and very and breaking the city up into very small neighborhoods, I guess.
So you talked about the trees, and they're really ancient beings, and they all have a story to tell, and I'm sure they are holding frequency in them, right, as trees, because actually there is sound wave in everything that is living. And one of the things that I've also been sort of discovering is that, going back to Rob's point, the ancient elders of land, of any nation, can tell you pretty much, if we asked them and gave them a voice, what was it like? What does nature tell us? How do we go back to that sort of primordial state and of being, of living, right? And actually, if you look at any nation, whether that be the Aboriginals in Australia, or if you look at the people in the Amazon, or the people in Canada, right? They're all the elders. Actually, I would love to bring a voice to them, because they could tell us very quickly the game plan, right? Learn from the land. How do we live? What's the best way to if we were going to troubleshoot this next 8.5 years? I'm sure all of them will have little pieces of the puzzle that would go, oh my goodness, if we just asked them, right? Rather than trying to look at new models and new and new paradigms. So I guess, Rob, what's your kind of view? How have you kind of measured impact of what you're doing?
If you don't mind, I saw a question in the chat which I can kind of answer at the same time. I think it sort of answers the question both perfectly. So there's no such thing as artisan plastic. So many things you can do on a small scale. We talk about shopping local, we talk about supporting local businesses, and absolutely we should all be doing that. But as a plastic company, we're in a very interesting position, because we need to produce scale. We need to be able to supply. Not everyone has an injection molder to make their own buttons in their shed. So we need to work with big industry. We need to, and actually we work from that top down. So it's interesting, because there's no way that we're able to be artisan, if you will. But that's fine, because actually it's about using industrial when it needs to be industrial, using local when it can be local. So just an example here, I've got a water bottle made out of glass, because this doesn't need to be plastic. I intend to have this for as long as I can keep it healthy and not smash it, because glass is great. It lasts forever. You can clean it forever. Another example on the other end of the spectrum are my Bluetooth headphones. So the electronic components within these headphones are only rated for 5 years. Say 5-10 years, the batteries will fail, the speakers will fail. But this plastic sort of prison, almost, if you go extreme, this plastic casing is designed to last for 2,000 years. So there's no synergy between this product, because the insides fail thousands of years before the outside. So for us, it's about picking a material that is making decisions that are very considerate and very determined in terms of
long term,
what they use. So to answer the question in the chat, which is, are our materials compostable? If so, are they home compostable? What does biodegradability mean? When I say it, biodegradability is something that we're all told, and a very long story short, biodegradability just means that it will eventually enter the soil without negatively impacting the soil. There's no timeline on biodegradability. That's an important thing to be told. So trees are biodegradable, but a felled tree will take years and years to eventually break down.
Right.
It's not the conventional apple core that we're told when we think about biodegradability, or a banana skin that disappears in weeks. So our materials are biodegradable because they will eventually break down. They will not negatively impact the environment. So we can tick that and be confident that our materials are biodegradable. And they're industrially compostable. And that's important because whilst it'd be great, whilst things like new innovations in packaging solutions made out of various bioplastics are great, that they're home compostable because they do their purpose, they can be home composted and they can be sort of disposed of responsibly. We're working with an eyewear brand called Asymptate. Now, if you're wearing your glasses, you're caught in a particularly maybe humid storm, and all of the sort of numbers came together which sort of mimicked home composting, then your glasses would compost on your face in a couple of months, which is obviously completely the opposite of what you want to happen. So with our materials, you can have products that last a longer period of time. They work with the user. So if the user wants their glasses for 5 to 10 years, they can. But then we make sure there's the option for recycling, the option for industrial composting, because these options are there. It needs to be educated with consumers and manufacturers that actually finding the right material for the right application. So don't make metal packaging, because metal lasts forever. Don't make plastic packaging. Make packaging that suits the object. Make heritage products like glass and metal. I know we're going over time slightly, but very quickly, a story recently, Heineken made paper beer bottles. I believe it was Heineken. I may be wrong, but paper beer bottles. And to me, that made no sense because they're made out of glass, which is infinitely recyclable already. So actually, they solved a problem that didn't necessarily need to be solved.
Exactly, with another material that comes from trees.
It was a paper bottle that had a bioplastic lining, which is actually harder to recycle.
Oh wow! Okay.
So I think tackling problems, making conscious decisions, is something we can all do. Just to begin to make change. Just every decision you make, is it a purchase, is it designing a product, is just make conscious decisions about why you're doing that thing. And I think that's sort of the best sort of advice that I could give.
That's awesome. I could talk to you guys for hours, actually. We should catch up for a glass of wine one day. Not in one of the cities that you mentioned you don't want to be in, but we should definitely catch up again. I guess just to end, just any sort of lasting thought for the moment we're in. We're in the final, the second half now of the year. We're hopefully seeing some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, the lockdown tunnel. What do you want to tell the world, Sarah?
I mean, for us, we've just been trying to, power positivity has, been our mantra for the last couple of weeks. We thought we were going to be getting out of lockdown last month. That didn't happen. That kind of set us back for even our own timeline for our business. And I think it's just a matter of, counting the blessings that we do have and, staying positive and hoping that, I just feel like if you put good energy out into the world and hope that everything sort of works out, generally, these things tend to happen. And so, for whether it's through your business means or personal or whatever it is, I'm just constantly just in the stage of projecting positive thoughts and just,
Well, I hope everyone who's watching this
hope for the best and take day by day.
I was just going to say, I hope everyone who's watching this does come to Infinite Closet. I'm certainly going to start shopping there now. I've got lots of clothes to donate as well. But yeah, no, it's incredible. So tell us who wants to go next. Paul, why don't you give us your final words of wisdom?
My words of wisdom. Okay. Well, I think the point I'd like to make is that I think we should all remember the solace that nature provided during lockdown. And I plead that in the future, we ensure that we put nature at the center of everything that we do, particularly when it comes to designing the city and making cities livable. That was so apparent during lockdown. It was so important for so many people. And I don't think we should forget that.
Beautiful. Rob?
I don't know what I could really add that would finish better than that. I think I tell you what, something's completely different to what I've sort of said, which I'm really looking forward to getting back to, and I think we are having that, is listening to other people's stories that are completely not in the world that you live in. I think it's been wonderful listening to Sarah and Paul. I know my drive home, I'm probably going to almost crash because I'll be appreciating all the trees along the road in Leeds, because I'm just finding. I think one thing we struggled with lockdown was talking to new people and finding new experiences. And I think that's how we're going to solve a lot of problems as well, is actually opening ourselves up and being open to new things, being open to renting clothes rather than purchasing clothes. It might feel strange or uncomfortable initially, but give it a go. And I just want to say thank you for sort of allowing me to sort of be on the panel between two amazing other panelists and yourself as well.
That's
Absolutely.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and we're going to blast this out, and lots and lots of people are going to, see this and catch this. And I want to stay in touch. Definitely, let's definitely get that drink together. And Rob, you can come to London again. So have a great rest of the week, and the great rest of the year. And we'll see each other soon.
Yes. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Take care.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.